What's up guys, Virgil here for JRPG Central, and today we're going to be doing a ranked video. I thought it would be fun for me to personally rank every boss theme in the mainline Final Fantasy series based on my own personal taste. So today, that's exactly what we're going to do. But first, let's go over the ground rules. First off, this ranking is only of the standard boss themes, meaning no final boss themes or special boss themes. Also, Final Fantasies I and II are not eligible because neither of them had a true standard boss theme in their original incarnations. Finally, I won't be including 11 or 14 because they are MMOs that I have not played, and they probably have more boss themes than I could possibly begin to sort through. I also won't be considering any spin-offs or sequels in this list. This is purely for the mainline numbered entries. Did that make sense? I hope it made sense. Also, I'm going to be getting pretty nerdy and granular at times here, so I hope you enjoy that sort of thing. If not, this video might not be for you. So with that out of the way, let's count them down. This is every Final Fantasy boss theme ranked from worst to best. Starting off the list with a game that I think is actually often overlooked in the pantheon of Final Fantasy releases, Final Fantasy V is a great game that further perfected the job system that Final Fantasy III introduced on the NES. However, I find its music, and more specifically in this case its boss theme, not particularly strong. It's a fine theme, not bad, but it doesn't really stick out in any major way. It's more akin to a boss theme you'd hear from a more average JRPG from this era, and certainly from a lesser composer than Nobuo Uematsu. It's a very ominous track, if a bit boring in my opinion. While I genuinely love the last 15 seconds of the track, that alone is not enough to place this track higher on the list for me. Sometimes it's crazy to think that this track and Battle at the Big Bridge are from the same game, but that's a different song for a different video. Final Fantasy XII is an odd one. I only recently finally played it for the first time on the PlayStation 4, and while I genuinely enjoyed my time with the game, I couldn't begin to tell you many details about the story or the plot. Similarly, I found its music, while fitting to the world of Ivalice, mostly forgettable. In fact, before this video, I couldn't recall the boss theme whatsoever, though upon listening to it again, I did come to appreciate it a bit more than I did. It's got a big orchestra feel, which was a first for the series, and it certainly serves its purpose while fighting against a boss. It's a fine track, all things considered, but in my opinion, it doesn't go above and beyond, and that's what's tough about ranking these tracks. None of these songs are bad in any way. Some of them are just less good than others, and with Final Fantasy XII's boss theme, this is certainly the case, in my opinion. Final Fantasy boss themes seem to almost always take one of two routes. Either be epic and grand to build suspense, tension, and dread, or be an absolute jam that makes defeating the boss that much more satisfying. This track falls into the former, building tension with its booming bass drums and piano that pervades the entire track. Originally, I expected this one to be lower on the list when I first started ranking them in my head, but I did come to appreciate it more once I gave it another listen for this video. I dig this track, and I think it fits perfectly with Final Fantasy IX, though of the two flavors of boss themes that Final Fantasy usually takes, this style isn't my favorite. I feel like some people may find it odd how high this one is on the list, but I feel that it perfected what Final Fantasy IX's theme was going for. Again, like IX's, this theme is all about tension and suspense, and it builds it with some pretty similar instrumentation as well. However, this track crescendos into a choir towards the end of the loop, which I love and really instills that sense of dread and urgency. Every time I hear this track, I think of the first time I fought the Chocobo Eater on the cliff, and the anxiety that original fight gave me. No doubt that fight was as memorable as it was for me, thanks to this accompanying boss theme. The instruments do sound a bit dated by today's standards, but it fits with the time period the game came out in. And if you're playing it these days on modern platforms, the HD remaster has an all-new arrangement to choose from. Though we won't be covering any of the HD remaster arrangements here in great detail. There are many different boss themes in Final Fantasy XV, but I went with the one that I believe is closest to what I would consider the standard boss theme in the game, and that is Omnis Lacrima. This was one of the first pieces of music ever released for the game, back when it was still known as Final Fantasy Versus 13, and was the theme that played when you fought Deadeye in the episode Duskai demo. If you've been around the channel for a bit, you know that I'm not the biggest fan of Final Fantasy XV, but despite how that game ended up shaping out, that Duskai demo was incredibly memorable to me, and this track was a big part of why. I'll never forget coming up on Deadeye with that wonderfully ominous choir hitting me right in the chest as I pulled out my sword raring for a fight. It's got one of the most powerful openings to any regular boss theme, and it still sends chills down my spine to this day. The rest of the track is great too. It's got good use of choir, piano, and strings. But unfortunately, I feel that the track kind of peaks in its first 30 seconds, as incredible as those 30 seconds may be, and that's why it's not higher on the list for me. Here we have it, the first official standardized boss theme in all of Final Fantasy. So for a quick history lesson, Final Fantasy I originally only had one battle theme for every single battle, including the final boss, if you can believe it. And Final Fantasy II had a boss theme that played for some bosses as well as the final boss. Since then, that song has been exclusively tied to the final boss of Final Fantasy II in all subsequent versions of the game, so I consider it to be the final boss theme of that game, and that is why neither of them are on the list. Final Fantasy III is the first game in the series to distinguish between the battle theme, boss theme, and final boss theme. And what a great boss theme it is. It's upbeat, catchy, and fun with some awesome percussion, especially for the hardware limitations. It's a bit short at 46 seconds, but it's an incredible piece of music and a true precursor to Uematsu's later work on the SNES. While Final Fantasy VI is my favorite Final Fantasy game, you may be shocked to hear that its music is not my favorite. Again, I'm not saying it's bad, but I do think it's less good than others in some areas. In this case, its boss theme only lands at number 5 for me. I think what I appreciate most about this track is how different it is from other boss themes in the series. I feel like it really tries to do something different melodically. From beginning to end, it's truly unlike any other theme in the series. The star of this track, though, is the percussion. Coming off of Final Fantasy IV and V, the work here is incredible, with amazing fills and flow and great reverb too. My biggest gripe with the track is its length. It's one of the shorter modern boss themes, coming in at only 52 seconds, and I've always thought that it loops harshly right when the song is getting good. It's like the track is missing something, like another phase maybe. With that said, it's still in the top 5 of all Final Fantasy boss themes, and one that always brings back good memories every time I hear it. As I said before, most Final Fantasy boss themes usually do one of two things: build tension/dread, or give you a triumphant track to beat the boss to. Very few of them do both. This track takes its time and builds slowly in its first 30 seconds, with light strings and brilliant riffs of piano ducking and weaving in between the intimidating beat of the drum. Then the song shifts with a larger focus on an anxiety-inducing melody on the piano before shifting once again to an uplifting crescendo with strings and horns. I adore everything about this track. I love all the time signature changes and how each section towards the build at the end of the track adds back in an instrument. It's the kind of track that you pick out something new about it every time you give it a listen. It's an incredibly layered track and one of the best boss themes in the series. I don't know that it would work in any other game than 13 though. It just kind of fits the overall tone of that game to me. This track is the second regular boss theme in the series and Uematsu's first foray into the 16-bit era. The Super Nintendo was a huge technological leap over the NES both graphically and auditorily, bringing with it for the first time a dedicated sound chip, the Sony S-SMP. This gave developers and composers 3 additional audio channels to work with over the NES's 5, as well as fully digital audio samples as opposed to the FM synthesis that the NES used. What does all this stuff mean? It means that Uematsu had access to a lot more tools creatively, and was able to make the third best boss theme in all of Final Fantasy as a result. I love how the boss theme starts with that classic battle motif before going into the boss theme proper. It's got that distinct early Super Nintendo sound that, if you've played a lot of Super Nintendo, you know what I'm talking about. Melodically, it's got an almost Saturday morning cartoon vibe to it, complete with different phases and a killer bass line. It's also got a really satisfying looping point with those 6 drum beats towards the end. Good stuff. Overall, it's just a solid track in every way, and it's my personal favorite of all the Super Nintendo Final Fantasy boss themes. In the same way Uematsu broke new ground with Final Fantasy IV, he did so once again with Final Fantasy VII, creating the longest, most lavish boss theme the series had ever seen up to that point. Fight On starts with what would become an instantly recognizable guitar riff before going into some jazzy synth and percussion. And the instrumentation floating in the background after is almost celestial in sound, clearly entirely by Uematsu's design and fitting with Final Fantasy VII's planetary themes. The track then shifts to a climbing melody on the synth, with some percussion and hi-hat fills in between a heavy bass line on the bottom. This track has so much going on in one song, it's ridiculous. I love it. And if you listen to it with a good pair of headphones, the track has some impressive stereo separation on the instruments as well. Listening to it now, it's still just as impressive as when I first heard it. Even when you think it can't get any better, it shifts into another melody or another phase. It's one of my favorite boss themes of all time, and truly one that never gets old, no matter how many times you listen to it. it certainly has its own fair share of issues, the one part of Final Fantasy VIII that we can all seem to agree on is that its music is fucking awesome. And its boss theme, For Sure Way, is one of the many, many great examples of that fact. This track has it all. It's got strings, electronics, synth, electric guitar, a subtle but pervasive bass line. But the percussion in this track is so good, it should be illegal. The drum samples and the reverb on those samples are so crisp and impressive. This is definitely one to put on a pair of good headphones, close your eyes, and just take it all in. My favorite part of the track comes at about 50 seconds in, where the synth and bass both swell into the bridge of the song before the final phase of the track. I'm a sucker for this style of build, and specifically the percussion used in the build in this last phase. It's one of those songs that just, if no one's around, I've got to hit the air drums with. I can't help it. I just can't help it. I could see how, if you're not really into electronic music, this track might not be one of your favorites, but for me, it is my all-time favorite Final Fantasy boss theme, and just like 13's, its composition fits perfectly in the world of Final Fantasy VIII. So that does it. That is every standard Final Fantasy boss theme ranked from worst to best, according to me anyway. So this time, down below, I would love to see your guys' boss theme rankings. I feel like we could see some pretty interesting and, dare I say, controversial lists down below. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button, because when you do, the almighty YouTube algorithm blesses this video and puts it in front of more people's faces, which in turn helps the channel grow. Also, if you are not subscribed already, be sure to hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss any videos. If you want to. You don't have to, but you really should. It'd be cool if you did. Anyway, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have a great day, and I will catch you guys in the next video.